Hello and welcome to this edition of Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Sellier and here are the top stories this hour. IDF tanks roll back into Gaza 2 days after surprise Israeli airstrikes effectively ended a 2-month ceasefire. Turkish authorities detain the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, President Erdogan's main political rival. And Google makes its biggest ever acquisition in Israel, the American tech giant acquiring Wiz for more than $30 billion. But first, Israeli tanks are back in Gaza this Wednesday and have retaken parts of the Netzarim corridor, which cuts the Strip in half. It follows a second night of airstrikes on the Strip, with the IDF targeting a Hamas command centre in Gaza City. The IDF launched a surprise attack on Monday night, effectively ending a 2-month ceasefire. Here's Israel's defence minister speaking a short while ago.
Residents of Gaza, this is your final warning. The first Sinwar destroyed Gaza, and the second Sinwar will completely devastate it. The Israeli Air Force's strikes against Hamas terrorists was only the first step. What follows will be far more difficult, and you will pay the full price. Soon, the evacuation of the population from combat zones will resume. If all Israeli hostages are not released and Hamas is not removed from Gaza, Israel will act with unprecedented force you've never seen before. Heed the advice of the US president. Return the hostages and remove Hamas, and other options will open up for you, including relocation to other parts of the world for those who wish to leave. The alternative is total destruction.
But of course, 59 hostages are still being held in Gaza, many of them still alive, and this latest round of bombing has raised concerns for their safety and well-being. Our Baligh Sladin is down at the Israel-Gaza border and joins us now. So, Baligh, IDF tanks rolling back into Gaza this afternoon. Tell us a bit more about what's happening.
Yes, exactly. So for the first time after the end of the ceasefire now, there is a ground operation ongoing in the center of the Gaza Strip and also in the south of the Strip as well. We're talking about the reoccupying of the sites that were left behind when the ceasefire started in the Netzarim corridor. They started from the east, of course, and they have reached, according to the IDF statement, the center of the Netzarim corridor, the Salah ad-Din road, the same road that the vehicles were using to go back from south to the north, and exactly the checkpoint that the American private company was using to inspect the vehicles that go back to the north is now closed because of the IDF's presence there. That's happening after reports from Gaza that this is the latest advancement for the Israeli tanks and troops in the Gaza Strip. By the way, also the Golani Brigade is now stationed in different areas in the south of the Strip, not yet starting any ground operation, but ready also to carry out operations in that part of the Strip as well. We've heard what the defense minister has said, that this is going to be gradual. We started with the airstrikes yesterday. Now the Navy is also attacking sites in the north of the Strip as well as in the western part of the Gaza Strip. But also the ground operation is now is starting as well. So this is the recent developments on the ground at the Gaza Strip. And while we're talking about this, let's also mention the evacuation orders that officially has been to numerous areas, especially in the north of the Strip, Beit Hanun, Abbasan al-Jadid, Abbasan al-Kabir, and other areas as well. But Defense Minister Katz said that this is only the beginning. It's going to be more evacuation orders when the fighting resumes. And today an Israeli media said that they're going to treat this whole evacuation orders thing differently this time. Maybe we will have more time later to also talk about this point as well.
Interesting, Baligh. Thank you very much indeed. Baligh Sladin there down at the border with Gaza. Well, Israel's return to war in Gaza has sparked protests around the world. The head of the United Nations, along with the French president and the King of Jordan, all calling for an immediate return to the ceasefire. More in this report.
A few hundred protesters gathered in New York's Times Square after a renewed wave of Israeli airstrikes killed more than 400 people, according to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry on Tuesday.
It is Israel and the United States that have green-lit a return to genocidal airstrikes after more than 2 weeks of a full, total siege. No water, no desalination plants, no electricity, no medicine. This is an attempt to destroy an entire population. You can see the anger and the outrage in the crowd.
Nearly 2 months of relative peace since the start of a ceasefire were upended by the most recent attack, which Israel claimed was only the beginning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying he ordered the strikes because Hamas had rejected proposals to secure a ceasefire extension. Jordanians also took to the streets of Amman to express solidarity with Gaza, and hundreds gathered at the Place de la République in Paris.
We're even angry because this is acceptable to be used as a pressure against Hamas or as a pressure for negotiations. The risking and the killing and the starvation of 2.5 million civilians is used as a bargaining chip.
Chile, which is home to the largest community of Palestinians outside of the Arab world, also saw hundreds gathering in protest. And while most protested, others made threats of retaliation. The leader of Yemen's Houthi movement, Abdulmalik al-Houthi, said in a video released Tuesday that his group would escalate actions against Israel in response to its continued assault on the Gaza Strip. The UN Secretary General said that the role of the United Nations was to have the international community press for a ceasefire, humanitarian access, and release of the hostages in Gaza.
We are witnessing a situation in which we had an intolerable level of suffering for the Palestinian people with the air raids that killed hundreds of people. We have humanitarian aid still blocked.
Israel and Hamas, which still holds 59 of the 250 Israeli hostages kidnapped in its October 7th attack, have accused each other of breaching the truce and of jeopardizing efforts by mediators to negotiate a permanent deal to end the fighting.
Well, security analyst Jonathan Regev is with me in the studio now to talk a bit more about what is happening in Gaza. Welcome, Jonathan. So the Prime Minister said last night, didn't he, that the airstrikes on Gaza were just the beginning. And that does appear to be true because as we see the tanks rolling into Gaza this afternoon, do you think the IDF is going to go fully to retake all of the positions it gave up as part of the ceasefire deal?
This is the plan. It doesn't mean that it will eventually happen, but this is the plan. And yes, both Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz, that's the plan they put forward. They said that this is a gradual operation, meaning it begins with airstrikes, begins with artillery. That happened on the night between Monday and Tuesday. And the next steps are a ground offensive, which we already see that has somewhat begun. I think that what Israel is hoping to achieve is to bring Hamas back to the negotiating table, but back to the negotiating table based only on the Witkoff plan and not on the second phase of the ceasefire that began 2 months ago. The Witkoff plan calls for the release, as far as we understand, of 11 living hostages and 16 hostage bodies. That makes up 27 hostages, nearly half of the 59 hostages left. I think what Israel is hoping to achieve through the military pressure that began and through the threats of a continued and upgraded operation, which would eventually lead to the takeover of all the positions. What Israel is hoping to achieve is the return of Hamas to the negotiating table based on those principles. If that happens, then the IDF, of course, will not go in, not for the time being. But, of course, there's the other side here, which is Hamas. For the moment, we're not seeing any major response from their side.
All right, under tougher conditions, then bringing them back to the negotiating table. For now, thank you very much, Jonathan. Well, was Hamas caught off guard by these latest strikes? And how will it now respond? Will it come back to the negotiating table? To talk more about that, we're joined by Hamas economy expert, Eyal Ofer. Thanks for being with us, Eyal. So, first of all, do you think Hamas had made the calculation that Israel would not go back to war, partly because of domestic pressure, but also, of course, the substantial international pressure on it?
Hamas was surprised, but I don't think that they have completely ruled out the ability to return to the war. They have prepared. They have, I'm sure, made hundreds of locations where they are booby trapping, and they are prepared for this next part of the ground offensive when it will start.
Do you think that the strategy here then is to bring Hamas back to the negotiating table under much tougher conditions?
I think this is the first part. If I can, try to estimate, I don't think that Hamas will be willing to release the number of hostages that Israel is hoping for. So I think that the return to ground offensive is imminent. It might take a week or two, but it will happen. And what I think Israel should remember is that the real reason Hamas was willing to release hostages in the first stage was because we have allowed the population to return to northern Gaza. I think this is the most pressuring issue for Hamas. So if Israel wants to achieve again what it was able in the first stage, we'll have to again focus on northern Gaza, evacuate the population from there, and only let it return once Hamas return the hostages.
And of course, Israel's putting the pressure on Hamas in other ways. 2 weeks ago, it stopped aid going in. I mean, is that having any impact at all?
Israel have put in, allowed to move into the strip supply which can last for months and months, especially fuel. Hamas probably have enough fuel now for 4 or 6 months. And as far as food, I'm sure that, every apartment, every neighborhood, every organization in Gaza have a stockpile of food for at least several weeks, if not months.
All right, stay with me, Eyal. I want to bring back Jonathan Regev, because there have been reports as well that Israel is threatening Hamas. If you harm any of the hostages, we will annex territory permanently. Any confirmation of those reports? Is that a strategy pursued?
There's no confirmation. If it's a strategy, yes. We know that if there's one thing that Hamas would not want to see is a permanent loss of territory. But again, how do you do that? How do you get the exact information as to what is happening to the hostages down in the tunnels in Gaza? It's very difficult. And then annexing a territory, I think, is something that would be problematic with the international community. Yes, Israel does value the international community, even if many factors in Israel would say we only value the United States and not anyone else. And then I'm not sure that President Trump would want to see Israel annex Gaza territory. As far as Trump is concerned, as far as I know, the Gaza Strip is about to become some American Riviera, isn't it? So annexing territory, I'm not sure this is the right strategy. It may sound good on paper as a threat, but as a plan, I'm not sure this is something viable.
Aya, what are your thoughts on that? And also, there are signs on social media today, albeit anecdotal, that civilians in Gaza desperately want Hamas to surrender. They want them to hand over the hostages. They want this done. They want their homes rebuilt and they want to move forward. Is there some kind of internal pressure on the group, do you think? And how can that be exploited?
I think that there are a lot of voices in Gaza which speak against Hamas, but we should not overemphasize those voices. They don't have the power to remove Hamas from Gaza. There, in my opinion, there is not going to be any kind of popular uprising. And we need to remember that Hamas is plugged into every part of Gaza. A lot of the population still support it religiously and organizationally. So I don't see any of those voices, although there are a lot, that would turn into a real uprising against Hamas. As far as the plan to what you called annex some parts of Gaza, I think that the better terminology is that Israel needs to have a buffer zone, especially in the northern Gaza Strip. And I've suggested long ago that it will be a sizable, about 3 kilometers from Israeli border. And in case that Hamas does execute hostages, Israel should extend this buffer zone further, because I think this is the only thing that impacts Hamas, a loss of territory. So I wouldn't call it annexing. It could be for 50 years security zone, but I think this is something that would pressure Hamas considerably.
All right, Eyal Ofer, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Arabic countries, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Egypt, have all condemned the renewed strikes on Gaza. And Cairo is reportedly working to re-establish a ceasefire as quickly as possible. This amid reports that there is resistance to Egypt's $50 billion reconstruction plan for Gaza. Gulf states, which are expected to foot the bill, are angry that it doesn't explain how Hamas will be removed from power. Here to talk about that, we're joined by Dalia Ziada. She's an Egyptian scholar and senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Dalia, good to see you again. Thank you very much indeed. And tell me, is it a shock to Egypt that Israel has chosen to go back to war in Gaza? And is Cairo under more pressure this time around than it was before to take in refugees and civilians?
Thank you so much, Laura. Always a pleasure to be with you. It's a good question. It's not a shock to anybody that Israel decided to go back to war on Hamas inside Gaza. Because from day one of the ceasefire, all the parts involved, including the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, and all the observers even, including also the United States and all other observers, knew that ceasefire will not last long because we couldn't count on Hamas credibility or Hamas keeping its word of releasing the hostages. And we saw afterwards the circus shows they held every time they release a hostage, including even releasing dead bodies. They made these shows around them to flex their muscles and show that they are still strong. So in my opinion, I think what Arab countries are experiencing right now while looking at this situation is a state of fatigue. They are so tired of this war. They are so tired of Hamas lies. They are so tired of trying to intervene to solve a problem that they know very well it's not going to be resolved as long as Hamas stays in power. So Arab countries are now divided, including the two main mediators, Qatar and Egypt. If you look at the statements they released, they have different languages. The language in Egypt's statement is much less hostile than the statements issued by Egypt in previous days of the war before the ceasefire. We also can see only a limited number of Arab countries who are issued the statements condemning the restart of the war: Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and I think Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, of course. So it's a very limited number of Arab countries. The rest are not actually interested in this anymore. I think they just want to go back to focus on their own priorities. And for Egypt now, I think the main concern is after, it's what being said in the media right now, in the Egyptian media, I mean, is mainly about what will happen if Israel, the Israeli military, gets closer to the Rafah border. So this is a big question now in the media, especially after the Israeli land operation inside Gaza has already started.
And what about these reports, Dalia, of a rift between Egypt and the Gulf states? Is there really a dispute? Because some of the Gulf countries are pretty angry that this whole big document that Egypt came out with at the Arab League summit in Cairo recently doesn't mention Hamas. It doesn't talk about it at all, let alone propose how to remove the group.
You know, one of the things that's making me really sad while watching how Egypt is dealing with whole situation is that I can very clearly see the influence of both Turkey and Qatar on Egypt's policy making, especially when it comes to Gaza, which is a shame because Egypt is bigger than that. So this eventually, what we are seeing now, it's not only making Egypt lose on the in the international arena, but it's also making Egypt now lose some of its closest allies in the Middle East, including countries like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And we can see very clearly that these two main countries, two key players in the region, two very, very important players for the United States and for the stabilization in the region in general, are not happy with Egypt's plan. And this was very clear in the level of their representation in the emergency Arab summit that Egypt called for a few days ago to discuss the Gaza plan. And honestly, if you look at the plan, it has nothing tangible. It only speaks about a very imaginary plan to reconstruct Gaza in 5 years, which we all know is impossible, with a huge budget, which we don't know where they are going to get this money from. And also, it didn't mention anything about the elephant in the room, the big problem in Gaza, actually, which is the removal of Hamas. All of this combined led eventually to Israel having to do the work, having to get Hamas out of Gaza in its own way, which is the only available solution now, which is a military solution.
Dalia, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed, as always. Dalia Ziada there.
Thank you so much.
Well, the former hostage Yarden Bibas, whose wife and young children were murdered in Gaza, has criticised the return to war. Bibas, who is campaigning for his friends David and Ariel Cunyo to be freed, says that military pressure endangers the hostages and only negotiations will bring them home. Hostage families and their supporters have been protesting against the return to war. Our Emmanuel Honora is down at IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, and of course, protests still ongoing, I see, Emmanuel.
Right, Laura, the protests are definitely still ongoing, and I'm going to try and not get run over because we are in the middle of the road right now. Right now, the protest is blocking the traffic. So as you can see, some of the traffic is actually going around the protesters, and this is a continuous fight for the hostage families, for their allies, for their supporters who have now been camping here for 11 nights. They're about to spend their 12th night camped out here at the IDF headquarters in a sign of protest. A sign of protest because the fight for them is still ongoing. There are 59 hostages still remaining, and they are truly concerned and angry now. It is beyond concern and beyond any kind of worry. They're just angry by the fact that Israel has now has resumed its airstrikes in Gaza, and they're very much concerned about the lives of their loved ones that are still held captive in Gaza. And this is right now, this fight is not going to stop, and we'll just have to see whether or not this amount of pressure will increase and whether or not it can actually bring something in order to bring back the 59 hostages, Laura.
Emmanuel, thank you very much. Emmanuel Honora there down with the protesters in Tel Aviv, and security analyst Jonathan Regev is with me. And that is part of the problem, isn't it, Jonathan? The country very divided over this, or not divided, I should say. They are very concerned about this, and polls do show there is a lack of trust in the government's motives for going back to war in Gaza.
Yes, just like every other issue, there's a very big divide in this issue. Did the government go back to war because the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister really think that this would be the best way to bring the hostages back? Is this the number one priority? Is it bringing the hostages back or something else? And why am I asking this? Because the incoming head of the Southern Command, Yaniv Asor, Major General Yaniv Asor, said just about a week ago in his inaugural speech that the number one priority is to topple Hamas. The number two priority is to bring back the hostages. So some are asking what are the interests of the government, while others are saying that the most important thing is to care for the hostages, especially hostage families and the opposition.
Yeah, an impossible choice. Jonathan, thank you very much. Jonathan Regev there. Well, despite the ongoing war and the hostage crisis, Israeli tech companies continue to make history. Google has paid over $30 billion for the Israeli cybersecurity company Wiz in its biggest acquisition to date. The agreement is worth almost double what Intel paid for a Jerusalem startup, Mobileye, back in 2017. Wiz was founded in 2020, right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and like all other Israeli companies, has had to deal with staff shortages over the past year, with many workers called up to serve in the reserves. More in this report.
It's Google's biggest acquisition in history, and the target is an Israeli company. Alphabet, Google's parent, has agreed to buy cybersecurity firm Wiz for a whopping $32 billion.
Wiz doubled in size, and it may double again into next year. And so there are no publicly traded software companies that are growing this fast. So that's why the multiple is so high, because Wiz is very rapidly gaining share within the cloud security market.
The deal allows Google to bolster its lucrative cloud business with AI-powered cybersecurity solutions that help companies tackle critical tasks. That helps it compete better in a rapidly growing industry with the rise of AI services like ChatGPT.
The threats are huge and they continue to get worse. It's not just hacks from companies trying to get ransom. There's now state actors that are trying to hack our companies from countries like China and Iran and Russia. And on top of that, AI makes security that much more complicated. It gives the bad guys weapons that they didn't previously have. So companies have to continue this cat and mouse game of getting better and better security tools because the tools that the bad guys have continue to get better as well.
This deal makes history in Israel. It's a crowded field, but this is to date the largest ever sale of an Israeli tech company. And it's reassuring proof that despite 16 months of war on multiple fronts, Israel's innovative and resilient tech sector continues to grow and deliver.
Well, time for a short break. When we come back, the United States continues to carry out heavy airstrikes on Houthi positions in Yemen. We'll have the details for you next. Stay with us.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
Welcome back. The United States continues to bomb Houthi positions in Yemen. Overnight airstrikes targeted Sada province, a known hideout for the group, along with the Red Sea port city of Hodeidah. The Houthis have vowed to continue their attacks on Israel and Israeli-linked shipping and now say they will attack the US as well. The Houthis claim, without providing evidence, that they have launched attacks against a US aircraft carrier in the Red Sea. We're here to talk about all of that. Jason Brodsky is the policy director of the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. Thank you very much for being with us, Jason. So the airstrikes continue, but there is still no sign the Houthis are ready to back down. Are these strikes making any difference?
Well, it's great to be with you, Laura. I do believe the strikes are making a difference in the sense that they are degrading the capacity of the Houthis to mount such attacks, and that's important. But we need to move beyond deterrence by denial to deterrence by punishment, and that is going to entail imposing consequences on the Houthis' patron, the Iranian regime. I think the president the other day mounted a very good threat and a very important threat against the Islamic Republic, threatening them with consequences if they continue to arm the Houthis. And just today, the president tweeted that based on reports he's receiving, the Iranians have lessened some of the supplies to the Houthis. And I think that that's a result of the threat that the president made. And I think it shows the Iranians listen and pay very close attention to such threats from the United States because they want to survive the situation. But make no mistake, the Houthis are going to the Iranians are going to continue to support the Houthis, and they're going to scale down the supplies maybe to survive this situation. But in the long run, the Houthis are an important part of the Islamic Republic's grand strategy and proxy doctrine.
So the strategy will be to keep their heads down for a bit and then come back later on. President Trump has issued another threat in the last hour. He says the Houthis will be completely annihilated, and he has called on Iran once again to stop aiding them immediately. So are we going to see this escalation continue, do you think? And how is this different to the airstrikes that were carried out by the Biden administration in conjunction with the European countries?
That's a powerful threat from the president of the United States. The strikes that the Trump administration are mounting are different from the Biden administration in the sense that the Biden administration's really focused more on targeting missiles, drones, radars, and those kinds of installations, whereas the Trump administration strikes are broader and deeper, including decapitating Houthi leadership. And that's a very important step that the Trump administration is taking. But we have to marry that, as I said earlier, with the denial of the capacity and the degrading of the capacity of the Iranian regime to supply the Houthis. And that's going to take interdictions. That's going to have to take potential strikes on ports, Iranian ports, which are supplying the Houthis, and also targeting IRGC intelligence assets and targeting ships. And that is something that the National Security Advisor has hinted at in recent days, and I think the Trump administration should be pursuing those targets.
There are reports tonight, Jason, that President Trump has given Iran 2 months to reach a deal on its nuclear program. He has said he would prefer an agreement to war, to military action in Iran. What kind of deal do you think he wants, and will it be possible to get a deal that genuinely stops Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon?
Well, I think that report reflects that this is a very Trumpian, coercive diplomatic play to provide an off-ramp to the Iranians to de-escalate via a deal, but warning them of consequences if they choose not to do so. And that 2-month deadline is very tight, and I think that's very important. And I applaud the president for giving a deadline to the Iranians, because the Iranians are grand masters at launching negotiations which go nowhere, take forever, waste the time of the international community, waste the time of the United States, waste the time of its allies. But the Trump administration is giving them a deadline, and what happens with the deadline is you have to be prepared to act if the Iranians do not choose not to play ball. And so that's going to be a test of the Trump administration. So when we're laying down a red line, you have to be prepared to act on that red line if the Iranians don't choose the path that the United States hopes it will choose. So that's the challenge here, and I think it's going to be incumbent on the administration to be able to prove that it will act. Looking at what it's done in other theaters with Hamas recently, I think it shows that the administration is not afraid to give a deadline and then act on if that deadline is not met.
Right, yeah, we've seen what happens in the past, haven't we, if red lines are not enforced with tragic consequences. Jason, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it, as always. Jason Brodsky there.
Thank you.
Turkish authorities have detained the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, as part of what they say is an anti-corruption investigation. It follows a string of arrests in recent months of other politicians and journalists who have been critical of Turkey's President Erdogan. And this just days before the main opposition party was scheduled to hold a primary election where İmamoğlu was expected to be chosen as a presidential candidate. Our Alex Schloss has this report.
Just days ahead of his confirmation as a presidential candidate, the mayor of Istanbul has been detained as part of what Turkish authorities are calling a corruption investigation.
Üzülerek söylüyorum.
I am saddened to say that a handful of minds trying to usurp the will of our people have used my beloved police, the security forces of this country, as a tool for this evil, and have piled hundreds of police at my house, at the door of the residence of 16 million Istanbulites. We are faced with great tyranny, but I want you to know that I will not give up. I love you all very much. I entrust myself to my nation. Let my entire nation know that I will stand tall.
It also comes just one day after Istanbul University annulled his degree over alleged irregularities, a decision which would prevent him from running in a presidential election. The arrest comes as part of a major crackdown on opposition figures nationwide in recent months. Authorities are also holding 100 other suspects, including politicians, journalists, and businessmen, as part of the investigation.
One can only laugh at such allegations. Such a thing is, of course, impossible. It cannot be. Such a thing cannot be. It is only laughable. There is a lot of wrong information going around. We all follow social media, don't we? For 20 days, a handful of people have messed up social media. They are horrible, horrible. It is completely a huge slander. Everything will come out in the open anyway.
Ekrem İmamoğlu is from the Secular Republican People's Party and is one of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's fiercest political rivals. In 2024, İmamoğlu secured a second term as Istanbul's mayor when his CHP party swept local elections in the city, as well as in the capital of Ankara. Not only is it the first time since Erdogan came to power that his party was defeated across the country at the ballot boxes, the elections also dealt a personal blow to the president, who grew up in and was a former mayor of Istanbul himself. The CHP was set to select its presidential candidate on Sunday, with İmamoğlu being the only candidate within the party. Authorities have banned demonstrations, meetings, and press releases for 4 days following the arrest, as well as restricted access to multiple social media platforms.
They are conducting a coup right now against İmamoğlu, who beat Erdogan 4 times at the ballot box since 2019 with the will of the nation. This is a coup to the national will and democracy.
This isn't the first time İmamoğlu faced legal issues. In 2022, he was sentenced to more than 2.5 years in prison for insulting public officials in a speech. İmamoğlu appealed the verdict, and his ban from politics did not apply as long as the trial was pending.
Want to talk more about that? We're joined by Yusuf Can. He's an analyst at the Middle East programme at the Wilson Centre. Good to see you again, Yusuf. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit about Ekrem İmamoğlu. He is a very popular politician, isn't he? He sometimes jokes that he's the only person to have beaten President Erdogan in elections, which he has done several times. Is this an all-out attempt to crush the opposition on the part of Erdogan?
I believe so, yes, because Erdogan, through attacking İmamoğlu, and his candidacy for the presidency of Turkey, Erdogan wants to essentially, stay in power forever and take away the Turkish people's right to self-determine. So This is not simply an attack on Erdogan's personality, Imamoglu's personality, or his political success. And yes, it is that's also part of this attack on the opposition. Imamoglu is the most successful political figure that Turkey has ever seen against Erdogan in the past couple of decades, and not just winning in terms of electoral victories, but also in the public. He talks to different kinds of people. That's something that was kind of not the case before he actually became a prominent politician for the Republican People's Party. Now that he can actually communicate and engage with different sections of this Turkish society, whether secular or religious, whether Kurdish or Turkish, that is a danger to Erdogan. That means that Imamoglu can actually beat him at the ballot box, obviously in a fair election. But now that's not the case. Essentially, this is what's happening in Turkey is a coup. It's a civil coup, not a military coup like we're used to, but it is a civil coup used by Erdogan, using the judiciary as the tool to basically suppress elections overall.
And are the Turkish people going to accept this? I mean, because Erdogan has jailed so many political opponents already. I mean, big names that come to mind, Selahattin Demirtas, Osman Kavala. These were big, popular and powerful people who are now languishing in jail. Is this just going to be another one who is put behind bars and that's the last we hear from him?
Honestly, I hope not. But it's really up to the Turkish people. Since this decision was declared, since Imamoglu was arrested, thousands of people in different cities in Turkey have taken on the streets. And they will continue to take on the streets. For quite some time now, Turkish people have have forgotten how to actually protest, at least the major sections of Turkish society under Erdogan's oppression. Now that Imamoglu is such a figure like Imamoglu, the biggest political figure after Erdogan, is now potentially detained and is going to stay in prison for some time. Turkish people likely are going to continue protesting until some change actually happens. Again, though, to what extent that could be effective is going to be a major question, not just because Erdogan is a violent, politician and he will use violence against his own people, but because a lot of Turkish people, unfortunately, in the past year or so, especially after 2023 elections, the general elections, have kind of lost its faith in the possibility of change through electoral means. So that it's up
They've
to
lost faith in the democratic process.
Exactly. Yeah.
On Osman Kavala, I mean, he's a Turkish businessman and a human rights activist. He was thrown in jail in 2017. Now, I remember back then there was huge outcry in Europe. The Europeans were really putting the pressure on. Nothing this time. Barely any statements coming out of Europe today. And we can only assume that's because of NATO.
Yes, I don't think that's really surprising, considering the recent talks between Turkey and Europe, between Ankara and Brussels on Turkish involvement in the European security architecture. So that's not really surprising. They don't want to push Erdogan away, since he's been extremely useful for Europe for different reasons, including the Syrian refugee crisis, including exporting waste to Turkey from Europe, and many other things. So it's not really surprising that Europe is not really saying anything, since I don't at least personally, and I think a lot of analysts could agree with this, that Europe has put a values-based approach to politics on the background, unfortunately. So Turkish backsliding into authoritarian and further authoritarianism is not really going to make a difference in Europe's reaction.
All right, Yusuf, great to talk to you. Thank you very much, Yusuf Can
so
there at the Wilson Centre. Well, the French government has promised a graduated response after Algeria refused to cooperate on a list of some 60 Algerians that France was trying to deport. For several months now, Algiers has refused to accept Algerian nationals who have committed crimes in France or become radicalised. Algeria responded by, quote, reaffirming its categorical rejection of threats and attempts at intimidation. Well, to talk more about that, Elisa Pavia is the Associate Director at the North Africa Programme of the Atlantic Council. Good to see you, Elisa. Thank you very much for joining us. So it would appear things are going from bad to worse when it comes to relations between France and their former colony. Is that fair?
That's fair to say. First of all, thank you again for having me. So relations between Morocco and Algeria and France have been at an all-time high at this point, especially since Macron in July 2024 recognized Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara, which we know is triggering for Algeria, as Algeria supports the Polisario front in Western Sahara. And so since then, tensions have been rising, and Algeria sees this attempt by France to return these Algerian nationals as a way to impose itself as the former colonizer, to impose itself once again onto Algerian sovereignty. And so Algeria pushes back by not wanting to accept them, even though they are people that have, in one way or another, committed crimes according to French authorities.
So how does Algeria justify not accepting these people who are, after all, Algerian citizens?
They say that it's a way for France to exert pressure and that they will not be backed into a corner and be pressured into taking these Algerians back. And then there's also there are also several agreements in place between France and Algeria that date back to the post-colonial era that allow a great number of Algerian nationals to relocate for work purposes and under proper visas to France. And so whenever France, would like to send back a number of Algerian nationals, the Algerians will push back by saying that they are regularly in the country and there's nothing that they can do about it.
This is all very inconvenient, isn't it, for the Europeans, because they desperately need new energy sources as the war rages on between Russia and Ukraine. Algeria, of course, is a big gas exporter. What impact is that having on relations between other European countries and Algeria?
Mm-hmm. Algeria now has massive leverage. It has had a lot of leverage, especially, like you said, since Russia's full invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Algeria can use this to its advantage. It has already done so with Spain in 2022. However, it is true that France relies, when it comes to its energy intake, it relies heavily on its nuclear energy facilities that it has on its soil, but a large chunk of its crude oil does come from Algeria. However, back in 2022 with Spain, Algeria severed ties and relations severed trade relations on non-oil goods. So it's likely that Algeria may do the same with France, and so sever ties on non-oil goods, whereas it wouldn't target gas exports.
What about Morocco then? Is it able to play this spat to its advantage? Of course, Algeria and Morocco are arch foes, aren't they?
Yeah, and so Morocco can use this to its advantage by pointing the finger to Algeria and telling the Westerners how as it has been doing for years at this point, that Algeria is the spoiler and that it is impossible to maintain relations and strong ties with Algeria. And so, at that point, then the hope for Morocco is that that the other European countries will continue to isolate Algeria or try to isolate Algeria, and then continue to support Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara.
Elisa, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Elisa Pavia there at the Atlantic Council. Now, the Al-Qaeda-linked group Al-Shabaab has tried to assassinate the president of Somalia in the first such attack since 2014. More in this report.
An explosion rocked the Somali capital of Mogadishu on Tuesday when Al-Shabaab militants targeted Somalia's president, Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, in a bomb attack on his motorcade as it was traveling through the city on its way to the front lines of the government campaign against the jihadist organization. The president was evacuated safely following the attack, and state media showed images of the president in the Adan Yabal district of Somalia, where government forces are battling a 3-week-old Al-Shabaab offensive. Soldiers and local residents who witnessed the attack said that the president's convoy had been hit directly and that bodies were strewn across the scene.
A big explosion rocked Mogadishu's Hama Jajab district, especially the Horseed neighborhood. The Abdi Khan building has collapsed entirely. People whom we know and others we don't know were killed in the bomb attack. It is a deplorable incident, and we don't want it to happen again. I have heard between 7 to 8 people were killed in the attack.
While al-Shabaab regularly carries out attacks in Somalia as part of its decades-long campaign against the government, Tuesday's attack was the first to directly target the president since 2014, when they bombed a hotel where he was speaking. Not only has the government in Mogadishu recently stepped up operations against Islamist militants operating in the country, the breakaway regions of Somaliland and Puntland have also launched their own campaigns against ISIS, al-Shabaab, and other affiliated groups, sometimes in coordination with U.S. air power.
And let's end on a positive note. Hundreds of international decision makers all together in one place, with Israeli President Isaac Herzog leading a global initiative. It's called Voice of the People, taking place in Haifa. More in this report.
I'm very moved to see everybody here. It's an incredible crowd of people, a dream come true. A great vision, but the real story is you guys, members of the council.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog is on a mission of tikkun olam and is raising his voice in a new way.
From generation to generation, we must come with new ideas, brilliant and bold ideas of how we deal with our Jewish identity, which is ever challenged, especially in this era. And the lack of knowledge and understanding of the challenges that each one of your respective communities faces has to be told to one another. Look at the diversity that's in this room. Everybody's here, all facets of Judaism.
The inaugural Voice of the People 5-day summit in Haifa united and inspired a global movement never seen before.
We see this initiative not as a think tank, rather, but something, as we call it in Hebrew, tachlis. We want to actually affect the future. I keep telling the council members, we want to be part of the history of the future. I want you to tell your grandchildren, we were at the first cohort of Voice of the People, because we're building a movement. We're building something that will be told and taught about for years to come.
Being in the land of Israel at such a crucial time and sensitive time has given us the opportunity to feel that there's many ways to give back to Israel. It's like the first time that I feel diaspora Jews and local Jews were working together to make magic happen. What that magic is gonna look like, I still don't know.
He knows.
He knows. I still don't know, but we know we are working hard towards getting a common sense of one people, one Am.
I was physically assaulted with my group during the LGBT Pride March in Washington, D.C., and then the same thing happened again during the Pride March in New York City. Since 2016, I've been raising the red flags about Queers for Palestine. I'm meeting with Knesset members to advocate on behalf of the American Jewish population and speaking about how the Israeli political system very much has failed, in my opinion, the Jewish community internationally.
During the gathering, they also learned about impressive Israeli startups that are changing the world.
So how much it cost? For the drilling, the construction, the pipe, everything I told you, $65,000 at most to bring water to a village of 10,000 people.
But now the pressure is on for the debut council of 50 people from Israel, 50 from North America, and 50 from the rest of the world, to literally put on their thinking caps and to get along for the next 2 years.
What's really incredible about being here is the innovation around this program. We have 150 people coming from very contrasting backgrounds, all with the same united ambition. You know, they always say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There's one consistent opinion here. Everyone wants to contribute to the story of the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and that's special.
I started an online social media platform speaking about news and trying to make it much more easy and simplified for the masses. I never ever thought I'd do work in the form of journalism, and never never crossed my mind. And so I think there's more and more of us, and I hope that they'll just continue to grow.
I can't say that you're handpicked because you were picked by an algorithm, but it's truly each and every one of you is expected to influence the Jewish story wherever you are for the rest of your lives. Look how many terrible atrocities have befallen our people, and we strive on and on and on, and we do good, and we strive for the great values of Tikkun Olam.
They're a tiny country fighting back against global hostility and anti-Semitism. Well, that's it from me. Do stay with us on I24 News. David Matlin is up next with tonight's rundown. Good night. Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing I24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
How do you get your news? How do you know what sources to trust? And to paint a clear picture of the entire story, you need a breakdown of the constant stream of events, top stories, expert analysts, and the best journalists bringing you real voices on the ground. We're breaking it all down on The Rundown. Get the facts, stay informed, and be a voice of reason for the Middle East.
Introducing the brand new I24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News Video On Demand app today.
The Israel Defense Force begins an offensive in the Gaza Strip with widespread surgical airstrikes and focused ground maneuvers against Gazan terror groups, while everyone questions how far the campaign will go this time. Itamar Ben-Gvir returns to the Israeli government he left in protest over the ceasefire and hostage deal with Hamas, apparently confident now that diplomacy is over and that war is back. And Israeli cybersecurity startup Wiz is acquired by Google in the largest acquisition ever made by the tech giant. We'll look at that purchase, how it might affect the wider tech scene in Israel. Hello, you're watching The Rundown here, live from Tel Aviv this hour at I-24 News. Good to have you with us. A lot taking place at this hour. And we begin as the Israel Defense Force is blocking the movement of Gazans northward inside the Strip, cutting off the main road. And tanks are maneuvering again in the central Netzarim corridor, evacuated during the latest ceasefire. Now, these are just the latest indications of where the situation may be headed. This is after waves of precision airstrikes that hit strategic Hamas targets throughout the coastal enclave yesterday, and Gazan authorities claiming hundreds killed. But the unfolding developments carry with them many layers. The political landscape in Israel, omnipresent over the next steps we may take as a country, and the supremely sensitive issue of those remaining Israeli hostages weighing on us all. Now, we'll discuss all angles this hour. First, to the latest now, as we go to Belir Sladen, our correspondent. He's in southern Israel near the Gaza Strip. Belir, what about the latest developments? Let's start on this. Reports of IDF ground maneuvers inside Gaza. What's happening?
Yes, let's maybe start with the joint statement by the IDF and the Shin Bet just a short while ago, saying that they have targeted two terrorists that were using a car in the south of the Gaza Strip, as well as an observation post and some infrastructure that was used by the Palestinian factions inside the Gaza Strip, and additional operatives in that area. This is the latest by the IDF and the Shin Bet. Just also over an hour ago, they have reported targeting two senior Hamas officials in the political bureau, actually not the military wing. And that's after what we have also gotten from the latest statements by the IDF. What you've just mentioned, the troops are advancing into the Gaza Strip once again, the Netzarim corridor. They have reached the Salah ad-Din road, that same road that splits the Gaza Strip between the west and the east of it, and also it's of course the same corridor that splits the Gaza Strip from south to north. This is the checkpoint that the vehicles that were used by the Gazans to go back to the north were inspected in. By the way, sources to I-24 News said that the American private company that operated there just left its positions over 24 hours before this maneuver started. Apparently, they have gotten the indication from the IDF that this is going to be the advancement in the next day.
Look, speaking about indications from the IDF, one of the key indicators I think we have on the table at this point are the evacuation orders. There are warnings, being given out by the IDF to various areas in Gaza. What's the latest around that, Belir?
Yes, definitely. So we've seen the official evacuation orders until now, Beit Hanun, Abbasan al-Kabir, Abbasan al-Jadid, other areas in the north. But this time, apparently it's going to be different. This is according to a report by Channel 14, an Israeli media. They are saying that the IDF is intending this time to evacuate all residents of the Gaza Strip to a new humanitarian zone that will be set for a long stay. This is going to be different than what we have seen before. The IDF was given evacuation orders to the humanitarian zone in Deir al-Balah and other areas alongside the Palestinian faction. This time is going to be different. All of them with inspection to this new humanitarian zone.
Belir Sladen near the Gaza Strip now with the latest, again, the Israeli offensive underway, as far as we can tell, and we'll follow all the details. But the ceasefire that held for nearly 2 months appears to be over. Israel's taken the offensive again after watching Hamas and other armed factions regroup and redeploy throughout the recent weeks. And now, around the world, pro-Palestinian demonstrators are again rallying to defend the plight of Gaza, also reorganizing as Israel again goes on the offensive. Take a look.
A few hundred protesters gathered in New York's Times Square after a renewed wave of Israeli airstrikes killed more than 400 people, according to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry on Tuesday.
It is Israel and the United States that have green-lit a return to genocidal airstrikes after more than 2 weeks of a full, total siege. No water, no desalination plants, no electricity, no medicine. This is an attempt to destroy an entire population. You can see the anger and the outrage in the crowd.
Nearly 2 months of relative peace since the start of a ceasefire were upended by the most recent attack, which Israel claimed was only the beginning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying he ordered the strikes because Hamas had rejected proposals to secure a ceasefire extension. Jordanians also took to the streets of Amman to express solidarity with Gaza, and hundreds gathered at the Place de la République in Paris.
We're even angry because this is acceptable to be used as a pressure against Hamas or as a pressure for negotiations. The risking and the killing and the starvation of 2.5 million civilians is used as a bargaining chip.
Chile, which is home to the largest community of Palestinians outside of the Arab world, also saw hundreds gathering in protest. And while most protested, others made threats of retaliation. The leader of Yemen's Houthi movement, Abdulmalik al-Houthi, said in a video released Tuesday that his group would escalate actions against Israel in response to its continued assault on the Gaza Strip. The UN Secretary General said that the role of the United Nations was to have the international community press for a ceasefire, humanitarian access, and release of the hostages in Gaza.
We are witnessing a situation in which we had an intolerable level of suffering for the Palestinian people with the air raids that killed hundreds of people. We have humanitarian aid still blocked.
Israel and Hamas, which still holds 59 of the 250 Israeli hostages kidnapped in its October 7th attack, have accused each other of breaching the truce and of jeopardizing efforts by mediators to negotiate a permanent deal to end the fighting.
Now joined in the studio now by security analyst Jonathan Rega and our correspondent Robert Swift. Gentlemen, look, Rob, first coming to you on the wider strategy that appears to be deployed right now. There's a lot of talk, obviously about the return of hostages, the defeat of Hamas, this sort of two-pronged, major war goals right now. What could be achieved? What appears to be what the IDF is up to now?
Look, at the minute we can see where the IDF is concentrating its troops. Netzarim corridor seems to be part of the focus, at least today, this evening. I would interpret that as basically the IDF returning to the strategy that it had used previously. It was able to capture all of the Gaza Strip, or to at least exert its control over much of the Gaza Strip using that method. So that's how I would interpret that. I expect in the next few days, possibly even by tomorrow, for the IDF to have captured all of the Netzarim corridor. That would therefore cut off the north and south of Gaza from each other. That then allows them to exert more control over Gaza in general, and I suspect then we will start to see targeted operations in specific neighborhoods of the Gaza Strip.
Jonathan, a lot of questioning right now. There's a new IDF chief, Eyal Zamir. This guy is known. I think he's made a lot of comments on the record about his understanding for the need to reconquer Gaza, sort of with the pressing issues on Israel. Is that what we're up to right now? Is that what the IDF is embarking on in this moment? I think everyone's asking how far this will go. Is this the complete recapture? Is there something else? What does it appear? What do you think we're heading into?
I think first, we know that there is a plan for a complete takeover. It just as where the forces were stationed some 2 or 3 months ago. Yes, there is a plan. Is this what Israel is hoping for? Not exactly sure. It seems as if what Israel is hoping to do with this operation, which is again, Israel has said since the beginning, since late Monday night, that this is an operation that could escalate. Israel, I think, is hoping to bring Hamas back to the negotiating table, but bring it back to the negotiating table only when it comes to the Witkoff plan. This is what Israel has said time and time again. We will negotiate as long as this is something that will deal with the Witkoff plan. It's a plan that, as far as we understand, calls for the release of 11 living hostages, 16 hostage bodies. That makes up 27 hostages, nearly half of the 59 hostages remaining. Of course, coming with very big prices that Israel will have to pay with the release of Palestinian prisoners. I think Israel Israel is exerting that pressure in order to bring Hamas to the negotiating table, but on these terms, not on the terms which Hamas is asking for, which is the second phase of the ceasefire, that ceasefire which began 2 months ago and is now collapsing. Of course, there's another side to this, which is Hamas. They have to agree. So far, it is not happening, but we have heard already the Hamas spokesperson saying that Hamas never completely rejected the Witkoff plan, and we know that a Hamas delegation has been called urgently to Cairo. So some kind of negotiations are heading towards that direction. Does this mean that it will eventually happen? Absolutely not. We don't know that.
Look, Rob, the hostages, the remaining hostages there appear at this point to be a critical strategic asset, I'll put it that way, for the Palestinian side. It got them access to the White House just last week in these talks. So it's hard to conceive of what conditions they would ever relinquish such an asset. Again, it's all they have left. They don't have a rocket arsenal anymore. Their commanders are killed. Their tunnel network, we don't know the status. But on these talks, what may be bringing Hamas to the table or not, the Prime Minister himself, Netanyahu, said no more talks unless it's under fire. So in other words, all negotiations will be under fire from this point. Are there still talks taking place? What's the status of the sort of negotiating at this point?
Yeah, I think you're right. From Hamas's point of view, they really don't have any assets apart from the remaining hostages that they hold. That makes it also, therefore, difficult to understand why they would hand them over, especially when the alternatives they're being given are basically be destroyed. Yeah. In terms of the negotiations going on, as is always the case with the negotiations, a lot of this is pretty murky. It's happening out of sight, necessarily. So it is entirely possible that, as Jonathan was just saying, that Israel hopes essentially that these maneuvers that it is conducting now will act as pressure on Hamas, and that will be enough to get Hamas to say, okay, yeah, we'll go back to negotiations. Clearly, Hamas are leaving that door open. The other alternative for Hamas is basically go back into guerrilla war. They have had some success doing that. It's just the consequences for that would be obviously devastating for the Gazan population. Not to mention that would also put strain on the IDF itself. We've talked previously about reserve numbers, that sort of thing. So that's unfortunately one of the options that we're looking down the barrel of.
Jonathan, another element we've seen here is in the last 2 days is sort of the resumption of this targeted killing, these strikes against Hamas leaders, going after the top. This has been, maybe an indicator of the seriousness of the campaign this time, that this is, they're in a way going for the kill, the IDF at this point. I mean, again.
Yes, and an interesting aspect, as opposed to perhaps the previous case, this time Israel is looking not only Israel is not going only after the military leaders of Hamas, but also the civilian leaders of Hamas. If there's one thing that helped Hamas preserve its control over Gaza, is its control over civilian affairs. It's the fact that it is perhaps the military people that were able to take over every assistance that is coming in, and then
all the supplies.
All the supplies.
Hundreds of trucks a day.
Hundreds of trucks, hundreds and hundreds of them coming in, humanitarian aid from Israel and from Rafah as well, from Egypt. And then the people in charge of the civilian life in Gaza selling that came into Gaza for free, selling it for millions and millions of dollars, and allowing this way, allowing
being the provider, being the sole provider.
Exactly, and allowing Hamas to preserve its control. It's exactly through that. When Israel takes down the civilian leaders of Hamas, not only the military wing but also the civilian wing in charge of governance in Gaza, Israel is perhaps indicating that it is now not only going after the military capabilities of Hamas, but now after the entire control of Hamas over the Gaza Strip, thus signaling that what Israel is hoping for is for someone else to take control over Gaza. Who is that someone else?
Big question.
That's a very big question, which Israel is not providing an answer to.
Well, certainly been a looming issue over Israel supplying Gaza while trying to squeeze Hamas, which has not seemed to succeed. We'll come back to you two gentlemen in a moment here. Another element to bring in here, and it's a large one. And huge crowds have come out across Israel over this. Tens of thousands of people marching to Jerusalem, flooding the streets of Tel Aviv today, crying out for the plight of the hostages, now in the face of this renewed Gaza offensive. Some 59 hostages remain captive in Gaza. Only about 20, some of them, thought to be alive. Again, quote unquote, thought to be alive. Highlighting the ongoing agony, the uncertainty hanging over the hostage plight and this issue, again, looming enormously over the Israeli public discourse and the national will to move forward and to fight the Palestinians again in Gaza. Virtually everyone questioning and debating how and where to draw the lines around this incredible dilemma. And our correspondent Emmanuel Honorat is out there today covering just this angle here. The public reactions, Emmanuel, to this renewed offensive, if you could describe, how these large-scale marches have manifested today. What's been the message?
Right, David, this is just a continuation of what we've been seeing now for over a year, for 530 days. This continuation of the protests here, which have a renewed sense of urgency given now that Israel has renewed its strikes and Gaza has resumed as part of its operation in Gaza. Now, the hostage families and their allies are extremely concerned about the state of their loved ones in Gaza and held by Hamas, and are extremely concerned about their lives. They are worried that resuming the war in Gaza might risk their lives even more, but not just that. They're extremely worried that this might cancel any chance of resolving this with negotiations, with a deal to bring back the 59 hostages remaining in Gaza. For these families, for their allies, the only way to see this through is to have a deal to bring back the hostages. And this is only one of the protests that has been ongoing today after the 40,000 that were united yesterday at Habima Square. There was also a massive protest in Jerusalem today against the statement of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said on Sunday that he will fire Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar, a major figure who has been part of these negotiations, part of these talks to bring back the 59 hostages. So you can really feel this renewed sense of urgency in Israel, but especially among the hostage families and their allies, to really put pressure on the Israeli government. For a lot of these families, they never depended on Hamas to bring back the hostage families, but they do depend on the Israeli government to represent them, to try their best to bring back their loved ones, David.
Emmanuel, thanks for the updates here coming to us from the loud protest there out just in Tel Aviv, this one. Look, we're joined by the cousin of hostage Evyatar David, Matan Eshet. Thanks for being with us, Matan. I know there are a lot of other places you could be this evening. There's a lot going on, so appreciate your time with us on the program. Look, we see this concerted effort, what appears to be one audience in particular from all these protests, the government. You're wanting to give a message to the government here. Describe that motivation, that feeling that you need to keep banging the drums, keep being out there with the signs and yelling to keep the government on this topic. Is that a major concern right now, that the government needs to be pressured?
In the end, yes. I think the most important thing is to remember that we still have hostages in Gaza, people who need to come back home, people who are suffering right now as we speak, being tortured, being humiliated. We heard so many testimonies of so many survivors who came back, who told us they are being abused every day. People who told us, Omer Venkret, who told us that his birthday gift was a crowbar to his face. People who are not eating, are not sleeping, who can't know if tomorrow will come for them. People who forgot what the sun looks like, what is the feeling of fresh air on their faces. People whose loved ones are still waiting for them. So I think in the end, the most important thing we need to remember is we need to bring the hostages back home.
What, if you can describe the feelings, of you and your family, upon hearing yesterday, really, that there's this offensive flaring up again, that the military's, going after Hamas again in Gaza. How did you feel seeing that?
The biggest thing isn't what we feel as families, because in the end, we are not the story. We are not what is important. I'm scared for what my cousin is going through. What so many people that are going through right now. What do they feel? What do they think about what's going on? Can they hear the attacks? Are they being treated differently? Does it mean that today there's no food? Does it mean that their captive are more violent towards them? What does it tell us about what's they're going through? What I'm going through matters none. I can be scared or I can be anxious, but in the end, my cousin is the one who is in danger, who is the one who is actually going through it. So I think here's the most important thing here.
Do you feel like you have an open line of communication with the government, with people in charge? I mean, is there a sense that going to the streets like this is the only way to really get the attention of this government right now? Or is there an open line of communication? Do you feel like you have good contact with the government?
I believe that in the end, except from going out to the streets, one of the ways to make personal connections, so it really changes between families. I would say that we did make some connections during this long time. And I do believe that talking to those people to remind them why we're here, why we're fighting, why people are losing their lives, hostages and soldiers as well. It's another thing we can do. Going to the streets is an important thing to show the national support and the national unity around this subject. But in the end, I don't believe it's the only way. Talking to people is a really important thing you can do. Talking to representative is a big thing you can do as well.
Matan, thanks for being with us. And again, your cousin, Evyatar David, being held in Gaza still more than 17 months. We wish you well and your family as well. I appreciate you joining us on the program tonight.
Thank you.
Bringing this topic back in the studio here with us again. Jonathan, obviously this hostage issue has been the biggest wound, you could argue, since October 7th of 23, and it remains so. And we talked about this strategic asset nature of the hostages here, but from the Israeli side now, it appears, and I think most polls are backing this up, and what we can tell, there's still widespread support in Israel, in the public, for making this the top priority, that basically anything that can be done to get the people back is what remains the most important thing. I mean, is that an accurate description of sort of the way the public is looking at this?
I think the public, yes, but the decision makers, I'm not so sure. By decision makers, I'm not necessarily talking about the government. It was about, I think, 2 weeks ago, when the incoming head of the Southern Command, Major General Yaniv Asor, he said in his first public statement, he said loud and clear, we have two issues. First priority is to topple Hamas. Second one is to bring the hostages back. Hostage families were furious at this because they said, as Israelis, everything should be put aside in order to bring the hostages. That should be the first priority. I think there's still a majority in Israel that views this, but there is a minority, but a considerable minority. We're not talking about just a few people who think that toppling Hamas would come first. And we've heard statements. We've heard Minister Orit Struk, I think, for example, she said, from the far-right party, the religious Zionism, but a member of the coalition, a minister, she said Israel would have perhaps to sacrifice some of the hostages in order to topple Hamas. This is an opinion that is circulating. I think it has the support of a minority, but I think it's a considerable minority and clearly a powerful minority because it's the one with the most connections within the coalition.
Look, Rob, just a short while ago, it feels like a week, 2 weeks or something, you would have seen a lot of signs, and maybe we still are in these protests, appealing to President Trump, saying, Trump saved the hostages. I mean, the president himself has made, a big deal, inviting them to the Oval Office, to the White House. He himself sort of championing the cause of this, dispatching various envoys, whether it be to Doha to directly negotiate. Witkoff, we talk a lot about. What's your sense for where the White House administration is standing in this moment right now? There's a lot of questions about it. Is it just a carte blanche? Is it a green light to the Israeli government now to do anything with Gaza, or is this hostage issue still driving them? What can we tell really by the U.S.?
I mean, it does seem to be that the US has taken a slight step back. They've understood that the negotiations they've been attempting, even the direct negotiations with Hamas, they seem to have run their course. And yet it does seem for that reason that they have given not permission to Israel, but they have expressed their understanding of Israel.
There haven't been clear statements to this effect. We're left to kind of read between the lines, between the statements on what this administration is up to.
Indeed, but as you say, reading between the lines, it does appear that there's a green light from the Trump administration for Israel to continue. That should hardly come as a surprise. Israel has, for much of the conflict, also had a green light from the previous administration, not to the same extent. Obviously,
there were a lot of red lights mixed in there too. But yeah,
there was,
right. But we'll see where this.
Let's call them yellow lights. Yeah. For example, over Rafah, the Biden administration clearly didn't want Israel to go in, but nonetheless Israel did. So it delayed things rather than stopped it. I suspect with the current administration we'll be seeing a lot more of a smooth flow from an Israeli perspective. Trump has expressed his threats against Hamas if they were not to play ball. Right. They haven't.
A lot of unleashing hell and things to that
exactly.
nature. Right. We heard a lot of comments. We'll see where things go on that. Rob Swift, Jonathan Regev, thanks for being with us so far on all the topics at hand here. We step out to a short break here on the Rundown. Stay with us, though. Much more to come your way from the latest in and around Israel here on I-24 News. We'll be right back.
Now, more than ever, we are all joining forces at the front lines and the home front in medicine, technology, research and development with hope. And together strengthen the Negev. Ben-Gurion University, the University of the Negev.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Introducing the brand new I-24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News Video On Demand app today. The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I-24 News.
Welcome back to I-24 News. Thanks for staying with us. Second half of the rundown now coming your way live from Tel Aviv. And Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet voted late yesterday to reappoint far-right political leader Itamar Ben-Gvir as National Security Minister. It's a position he voluntarily vacated to protest the recent hostage and ceasefire deal. But Israel's resumed offensive in Gaza paved the way for his return to the governing coalition. Notable, in voting to appoint Ben-Gvir to his old position, the cabinet disregarded the warnings of the Attorney General again, who had advised Netanyahu that Ben-Gvir's reappointment would not be legally possible. So another point of friction here we may discuss. But we're joined by Herb Kanan, senior contributing editor and analyst at the Jerusalem Post. Thanks for being with us, Herb, of course. Many are arguing, and I want to throw this at you first from the top here, many are arguing that this renewed offensive has solved Netanyahu's political problems, but might have been motivated purely by stabilizing his coalition, which it has. What are the main factors in play right now affecting the prime minister?
Look, I mean, the optics have led a lot of people to say what exactly you just said, that he went into Gaza now in order to shore up his coalition before the big budget vote. Israel has to vote, has to pass a budget by March 31st, or the government falls. Right? His coalition, because Ben-Gvir left in January, his coalition had gone down to 62, 63. To 58, 57. There's talk that some of the Haredi Knesset members would not vote for the budget. So he needs some more breathing space. Bringing Ben-Gvir into the government now gives him that breathing space. The question whether or not this is what prompted him to go into Gaza now, right? I mean, everybody's going to come to their own conclusions based on whether they trust Netanyahu or they don't trust Netanyahu.
Well, there's a lot of people arguing that there's an inherent conflict in this right now with Netanyahu's political needs and the country's strategic needs. Do you see conflict in those?
Look, I think it's interesting when you just compare this to what happened on October 7th. October 7th, October 6th, on October 6th, the country was as divided as it's ever been in its history. October 7th comes and everybody kind of unites around the flag. Everybody goes into the army. There's this great sense of we have to fight because if not, we're doomed. And nobody at that time questioned Netanyahu's motivations, right? Nobody at that time said, well, we're fighting this war because Netanyahu wants to deflect from the judicial reform debate, because he wants to quell the protests. Fast forward now to 16 and a half months later, and there are people who are questioning that. So as we are on the cusp of more intense fighting inside Gaza, the situation in the country domestically has changed, with many more people questioning the motivations than was the case on October 7th. And that's not necessarily a good place for the country to be at.
No, not at all. And I'd bring in another element here, the opposition. I think just today we've got some good examples, and Herb, you've got good institutional, perspective to answer this one for us. The opposition's taking it hard right now. You could argue undermining the war effort. We see Yair Lapid, Yair Golan arguing, essentially making comments that soldiers would die right now in vain. That this is, again, they're pulling it in that direction with their discourse. We haven't seen them talk this way. Earlier in the war, you mentioned the sort of unity, and at least in terms of the discourse and in terms of the sacrifice required. But again, a lot of these comments made now that are taking another direction. I don't think we've seen this level of, rhetoric from an opposition, anti-war, since the first Lebanon war in the early 80s. Have they taken it too far? Some are arguing that.
Look, I don't think it's politically necessarily going to be a smart move. I think that, the mood of the country, it's interesting because the public keeps saying unity, unity, unity, unity. And the politicians and the street activists and part of the media keep pushing us in the other direction. But I think that when we do go to elections, and remember, elections have to be held by October 2026, so they're going to be held.
Yep.
When that time comes, I think the public will punish those who led us into a very divisive place. So I'm not sure it's good politics.
Look, there's another sort of situation brewing under the surface here now. There's really open conflict between the government, the prime minister, the attorney general, with the head of the Shin Bet. These are two sort of battles it looks like they're taking to right now. How connected, are they to the war front? Where do these issues, are they on the side, or are they directly connected to the issues playing out before us on the war front?
Look, it's interesting because if you looked at the people at the protest today in Yerushalayim, there was a huge protest in Yerushalayim. These are the same people who were at the judicial reform. I mean, the people leading it were the people who led the judicial reform protest. So I think what you're seeing here is we have one big source of friction, disunity in this country, and that's over Bibi Netanyahu, right? He's the fault line. And all these issues, the debates we're having now, is the protest now against, his firing of the Shin Bet head or going back into Gaza? It's all the same issue. It's you either, you hate Bibi or you love Bibi, and that's what these protests are over. It's just, it's the same wine in different bottles.
Do you think it goes as far as, could you make the case that the opposition today, Herb, is more committed to defeating Netanyahu than they are to defeating Hamas, for example?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think that the opposition wants to defeat Hamas soundly and roundly.
But second or first? Does that come after defeating Netanyahu or second? I guess that's the question of how these issues are prioritized.
It's like the question, well, what's the goal in the war? Is it to defeat Hamas or is it to get the hostages back? I think, both they're both goals. And I think the same thing here. I think, the opposition wants to win the war, but they also want to use the opportunities that they see now to get rid of Netanyahu.
The inescapable politics of all these situations. Herb Kidden, thanks for being with us here. A lot of moving parts here. Appreciate your time with us on the program.
Thank you.
Bringing this issue into the studio again, here with Jonathan Regev and Robert Swift with us. Jonathan, the political angle is inescapable at this point. All the political layers to this. Look, just on Netanyahu and stabilizing his coalition, going into the critical budget talks, this has been argued is the center factor right now, passing this budget, that this has got to be a priority for the Israeli government or it could fall. I mean, this is according to the laws of the Knesset, of the parliament here. What are we likely to see in the next week, 2 weeks that we have until this deadline to pass the budget? Is it just inevitable right now that the ultra-Orthodox will get what they want, that the far right? I mean, where do you think this is going in the whole budget standoff? And again, connected to the war unfolding before.
I would say yes, everyone would get what they want, but some of the things that the ultra-Orthodox want cannot go together with some of the things that the religious Zionism especially wants. There's a lot of criticism on the party which is called the religious Zionism. At least by the name, it represents the religious Zionist sector, which is a sector that has is doing a lot, cooperating a lot,
representation within the IDF,
and losing a lot of lives. The religious sector of the religious Zionist sector of the Israeli society has sacrificed a lot of means and especially people.
And these are rabbis. I mean, guys who are like scholars and Torah teachers, and these are people who are heavily religious.
Heavily religious, and there's a lot of huge criticism within that sector on the ultra-Orthodox sector. They're saying, where is your Judaism? Is your Judaism about running away at a time of war, at a time of crisis? Why don't you cooperate? And then the party that, again, at least by name, is the one that is all about the religious Zionism, is part of a coalition that cooperates exactly with that. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is again, he does perhaps whatever is needed for his coalition to survive. What is the religious Zionism doing? And it's quite a big issue. Netanyahu will have to do, and there's a good chance that he will be able to bring the sides together, but it's not going to be easy. Giving the ultra-Orthodox what they want and giving the religious Zionism, maybe not the religious Zionism party, but the religious Zionism sector, giving them what they want is quite a challenge.
I think that's the key. I think you can argue Netanyahu's base at this point. It's not the center-right Likud, it's the far-right voters and the ultra-Orthodox voters. That's the ones he has to please in the next few weeks. We'll see where all that goes. Robert, on the issue of the international sort of scene, I think we have to bring in the other country here, the third country that started to shoot at us again since this offensive began yesterday in Gaza here. The Houthis have resumed fire at Israel, making a lot of threats at this point. We've seen the U.S. going hard at them this week. We're not sure where all the situation stands on there. What should we be paying attention to? What's happening on that front with the Houthis right now?
I think the most interesting thing to keep our eyes on at the minute is what impact this starts to have on the Houthis. We've seen that the Houthis can take a hit.
Yeah.
They've been suffering air attacks from the US plus allies for over a year now, and they took it pretty well. Prior to that, they were engaged in wars with various of their neighbors for a long time.
For years.
For years, yeah. some of them countries which were much more powerful than the Houthis, and yet they took that. So I think the interesting thing now is everything that's coming out of the US, is it just noise and a repetition of the previous tactics that haven't worked, or is the US doing something different? I think that will start to play out over the next days and weeks as we start to see attrition take place within the Houthis. If, however, if we see, modest gains, one or two individuals from the senior leadership are killed, then is that really something that's going to change the Houthis' minds? I would suspect not. And then that brings us on to, okay, so what else does the US try? If these airstrikes are not significant enough, what does it do next? Now, from my understanding, there are already some UK, US, and the likes special forces on the ground. That is consistent with a state conducting airstrikes. However, if they were to deploy additional troops on the ground, then maybe you could start to see something changing. But that's not even being talked about yet. No. That is, a serious escalation. It also runs counterproductive to President Trump's stated aim of wishing to prioritize the United States, wishing to reduce the foreign conflicts that the United States is involved in.
I think for now, we can say at least it doesn't appear that the threats, the attacks on Israel are serving any real deterrence on Israel as it moves forward? I mean, do you have the sense that it's a side factor, but it's not a deterrent?
But I think that's always been true with regards to the impact that the Houthis. The Houthis have always been within this war. I think they've been the wild card. They've never been able to have a significant impact on Israel, never been able to curb much of its actions. A combination of US and other allies' support plus the impressive air defense systems that Israel has basically mean that Israel has been able to keep the Houthis at arm's length. However, they have been the one player that could, set off sirens in Tel Aviv when everybody had kind of got used to normality.
No, we all refreshed our strong rooms and shelters in the last few days,
exactly.
And, across the country wide, in anticipation of more Houthi fire. So it's a factor. Robert Swift, thanks for being with us. Jonathan Regev, appreciate your analysis. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us tonight. An upbeat story to turn to today, and one of a lot of interest around Israel. Google made its largest acquisition ever, paying over $30 billion for Israeli cybersecurity company Wiz. Again, not the biggest acquisition of an Israeli company, the biggest acquisition ever made by Google worldwide. Almost double what Intel paid for the Jerusalem startup Mobileye back in 2017. But here's more on this stunning development and the latest success story for an Israeli startup.
It's Google's biggest acquisition in history, and the target is an Israeli company. Alphabet, Google's parent, has agreed to buy cybersecurity firm Wiz for a whopping $32 billion.
Wiz doubled in size, and it may double again into next year. And so there are no publicly traded software companies that are growing this fast. So that's why the multiple is so high, because Wiz is very rapidly gaining share within the cloud security market.
The deal allows Google to bolster its lucrative cloud business with AI-powered cybersecurity solutions that help companies tackle critical tasks. That helps it compete better in a rapidly growing industry with the rise of AI services like ChatGPT.
The threats are huge, and they continue to get worse. It's not just hacks from companies trying to get ransom. There's now state actors that are trying to hack our companies from countries like China and Iran and Russia. And on top of that, AI makes security that much more complicated. It gives the bad guys weapons that they didn't previously have. So companies have to continue this cat and mouse game of getting better and better security tools, because the tools that the bad guys have continue to get better as well.
This deal makes history in Israel. It's a crowded field, but this is to date the largest ever sale of an Israeli tech company. And it's reassuring proof that despite 16 months of war on multiple fronts, Israel's innovative and resilient tech sector continues to grow and deliver.
To get more into the story, we're joined by Neely Goldberg, tech entrepreneur and marketer and the author of Your Core 4, joining us from Tel Aviv. So thank you, Neely. Good to have you with us. Look, jumping onto Wiz here. Look, the company, if I have it right, started in 2020 during COVID. Not an easy time to get anything done. But how did this company succeed so astoundingly since then in the face of a pandemic, wars, etc.?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. But in the startup world, everyone talks about how it all comes down to the team. But what is it in this team specifically that, given the challenges you just mentioned and pretty many more, enabled them this kind of success? So these founders were already in the trenches working in the cybersecurity space from all angles. I guess that with all of the COVID and pandemic, it's like never waste a crisis, right? You have to put it to use. And as I see it, their vision, while being in the trenches and the experience, enabled them to foresee the future. And really, if you look at their solution, what they focused on are two things that I think are very interesting and are part of their vision. The first is the fact that their solution is accessible and that it's holistic throughout the 3 and more major competitors of the market. And that is something that was rapidly growing before COVID and even more so later. Wow. So what they actually did was enable a service that if you could also see their vision as entrepreneurs that have already, they already have a few acquisitions to show for, they saw the trio war of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, the accessibility that is needed, the penetration of AI, and they were probably the ones that could see how fast it's going to disrupt, and what the prerequisites, both in regulation and in any other way, that the market is going to require. Another thing is that since they've, in the whole cybersecurity space, and we can see that because if we look at the other acquisitions and how that market is moving, then there is some kind of cookie cutter or template version that we can see. These founders know how to play the game.
Look, so, on the big picture, on Google's interest, I mean, let's talk about Google for a minute here and their interest. I mean, you mentioned that there may have been some, their competitors were in the mix for this. Describe Google's interest in Wiz. What drove them to spend over $30 billion here on this?
Well, everyone's talking about how just about a year ago, they offered $23 billion. So that's also very interesting. Wow. What we can see, again, if we go back to that trio or the AI and the cloud security wars that these three have, then we can see that this kind of a solution was already very interesting and appealing to Google beforehand. They saw how this ease of access to full cybersecurity and across all borders and crossing all silos was something that would help them gain quite a few brownie points, especially in the cloud service business, but also moving into AI. Now, what happened in the past year? First of all, the company has grown significantly with its Fortune 100, not just 500 clients. They know how to create shorter sales cycles, given their experience. And what Google saw, they saw that since the letting go of $23 billion and a very, very interesting acquisition, what Wiz is doing is just they're just growing rapidly. The AI threat that we see, Microsoft is taking a very nice lead, and Amazon as well. Then that also got them to, I guess, see where they could move ahead and live up to their, by the way, vision of providing accessibility to all and a safe and secure place on the internet. So both things, and again, what Wiz also said, their strategy, as I would see it, was that may this or anything better come our way. So when they let down the $23 billion, their plan was like, okay, so we have this in hand, we'll go for the gold, we'll aim for the IPO, but may that or anything better come our way. So when Google saw that they're moving along, and I guess, there's a lot to that, alongside their continuous growth, you asked for another challenge, the war. Right. So I trust that quite a few of the employees at Wiz have been serving the reserves, and they've been on top of the most challenging AI and security breaches that are currently happening and in the foreseeable future. So with all that knowledge, all that adoption and growth, was easy.
Nina Goldberg, thanks for being with us. Clearly, it bodes well for the near-term future for the Israeli tech industry, I'd argue here. But thanks for being with us, Nina Goldberg.
Thank you so much.
Now, the Anti-Defamation League confirms that their CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, he's backed out of an upcoming Israeli conference on combating anti-Semitism. That's as he protests the inclusion of far-right European politicians. Now, many others have expressed concern and also backed out, arguing that participation in the conference is providing legitimacy to several populist parties, many of which, unfortunately, have histories of deep racism, anti-Semitism. But Greenblatt's retreat holds some special significance, not just running the Anti-Defamation League, but he was originally slated to deliver a keynote address. Regardless, the conference will be held in Jerusalem, March 26th, 27th. Now, hundreds of international changemakers converged for Tikkun Olam, hosted by Israeli President Herzog, spearheading the initiative called Voice of the People. Take a look.
I'm very moved to see everybody here. It's an incredible crowd of people, a dream come true, a great vision. But the real story is you guys, members of the council.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog is on a mission of Tikkun Olam and is raising his voice in a new way.
From generation to generation, we must come with new ideas, brilliant and bold ideas of how we deal with our Jewish identity, which is ever challenged, especially in this era. And the lack of knowledge and understanding of the challenges that each one of your respective communities faces has to be told to one another. Look at the diversity that's in this room. Everybody's here, all facets of Judaism.
The inaugural Voice of the People 5-day summit in Haifa united and inspired a global movement never seen before.
We see this initiative not as a think tank, rather, but something, as we call it in Hebrew, tachlis. We want to actually affect the future. I keep telling the council members, we want to be part of the history of the future. I want you to tell your grandchildren, we were at the first cohort of Voice of the People, because we're building a movement. We're building something that will be told and taught about for years to come.
Being in the land of Israel at such a crucial time and sensitive time has given us the opportunity to feel that there's many ways to give back to Israel. It's like the first time that I feel diaspora Jews and local Jews were working together to make magic happen. What that magic is gonna look like, I still don't know.
He knows.
He knows. I still don't know, but we know we are working hard towards getting a common sense of one people, one Am.
I was physically assaulted with my group during the LGBT Pride March in Washington, D.C., and then the same thing happened again during the Pride March in New York City. Since 2016, I've been raising the red flags about Queers for Palestine. I'm meeting with Knesset members to advocate on behalf of the American Jewish population and speaking about how the Israeli political system very much has failed, in my opinion, the Jewish community internationally.
During the gathering, they also learned about impressive Israeli startups that are changing the world.
So how much it cost? For the drilling, the construction, the pipe, everything I told you, $65,000 at most to bring water to a village of 10,000 people.
But now the pressure is on for the debut council of 50 people from Israel, 50 from North America, and 50 from the rest of the world to literally put on their thinking caps and to get along for the next 2 years.
What's really incredible about being here is the innovation around this program. We have 150 people coming from very contrasting backgrounds, all with the same united ambition. You know, they always say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There's one consistent opinion here. Everyone wants to contribute to the story of the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and that's special.
I started an online social media platform speaking about news and trying to make it much more easy and simplified for the masses. I never ever thought I'd do work in the form of journalism and never never crossed my mind. And so I think there's more and more of us, and I hope that they'll just continue to grow.
I can't say that you're handpicked because you were picked by an algorithm, but it's truly each and every one of you is expected to influence the Jewish story wherever you are for the rest of your lives. Look how many terrible atrocities have befallen our people, and we strive on and on and on, and we do good, and we strive for the great values of Tikkun Olam.
Out of time for the rundown tonight. I'm David Matlin, coming to you live from Tel Aviv, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us here. Much more to come at the top of the hour, all here on I-24 News.
Introducing the brand new I-24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News Video On Demand app today. The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I-24 News. Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Every week, we'll focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel, as well as in the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Zedek. Hi, Nicole. Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. American support for Israel has reached its lowest point in a quarter of a century, according to a new poll by Gallup. Sympathy for Israel stands at 46% compared to 33% for the Palestinians. Democrats are 3 times more likely to be sympathetic towards Palestinians, while Republicans are 7 times more likely to support Israel. Meanwhile, over half of Americans support the creation of a Palestinian state. Australian police have arrested and charged 14 members of an organized crime network in connection with a wave of anti-Semitic hate crimes across the country. According to New South Wales police, none of the suspects had previously displayed any anti-Semitic ideology, and they wanted to prey on the vulnerability of the Australian Jewish community. This comes as an alleged explosive attack on a synagogue foiled in January was actually a hoax, with an organized crime group wanting to divest police resources away from them. A Belgian writer who said he wanted to, quote, ram a sharp knife down the throat of every Jew he met, he's been acquitted on racism, Holocaust denial, and hate speech charges after a Belgian court found Herman Brusselman's words in the Belgian magazine Humo, they are protected by free speech laws. The ruling has been slammed by Jewish groups, with one Jewish leader calling it, quote, a deeply alarming message about the state of the fight against anti-Semitism in Belgium and Europe. Freed hostage Agan Berger has been gifted a 130-year-old violin originally from a Jewish musician who died in the Holocaust. The violin belonged to Tzachi Beck, who restored it a few years ago and refused to play it. He gave the violin to Agam, who says she wants to play it at the March of the Living at Auschwitz. And archaeologists in Italy have discovered a 1,600-year-old mikveh, the ritual bath used by Jewish women for purification. It was uncovered at the Ostia Antica Archaeological Park near Rome and found alongside an oil lamp decorated with Jewish symbols, including a menorah and palm leaves. Those are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily. American-Israeli former hostage Sagi Dekel-Chen was released from captivity a month ago, reuniting with his wife and 3 children. One was born while he was in captivity. Sagi's father, Jonathan Dekel-Chen, has been on the front lines fighting for his son's return as well as return of the other hostages, mainly lobbying in Israel and the U.S. And we are now joined by Jonathan here in Israel, the father of Sagi. First of all, hello, thank you for being here. And how is your son and your family?
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Sagi, all things considered, is doing okay. He, still has quite a bit of recovery and rehabilitation to go through. But he's home. He's safe. He's reunited with his wife and 3 beautiful little girls, and sort of playing some catch up because, of course, he was completely out of our loop in a living hell for 498 days, and that's quite a bit to catch up on.
Yeah.
And that's aside from healing his wounds and that he sustained on October 7th and the horrific conditions in Hamas captivity.
Right. You have worked tirelessly in the U.S., obviously in Israel as well, as you're one of a handful of families that go back and forth. I mean, do you feel now that there are positive results of all those efforts? Obviously, we have many home, but many still stuck both alive and not alive.
It will only be enough, and that's the key here. It'll only be enough when everyone is home. Everyone. From our home alone, from Kibbutz Nir Oz, small community on the border with Gaza that was ground zero for the Hamas massacre on October 7th. Of the 59 total hostages, 14 are from our kibbutz, 9 of whom we know have already been murdered. The other 5, we're not sure what their condition is. So, there's really no beginning again. There's no stopping, not just for us, but I believe for the vast majority of Israelis and for Jews in the diaspora, getting everyone home.
And also getting to the Jewish communities in the diaspora. Obviously, many fighting and keeping the plight of the hostages and their families, on, front and center. But there's been a lot of criticism. Not all of the American Jewish organizations have done, I guess you could say, as much as they could. Tell us more about that. I imagine disappointing.
Well, it's something that I've been concerned with for quite some time. Not just as the father of a hostage, now a newly freed hostage, and not just as a citizen of Israel, but also as a historian of the Jewish people, who knows a little something about the history of the Jewish organizational world, Jewish philanthropy, Jewish advocacy. I have done as much as I know how to get certainly the major Jewish organizations in North America, not to criticize anyone, but rather to come out with what I think is the strongest and simplest of statements, that it is a Jewish priority historically and right now to prioritize the fate of the hostages beyond any other goals that this or that government may have. That, as a people, we simply must not, we cannot, we never have allowed Jewish hostages, Jewish captives to suffer and die as they have been doing at the hands of Hamas while doing nothing, while standing by. I find that mind-boggling, and again, after many attempts to get the major Jewish organizations to come out vocally and to simply state those facts, I believe that some, not all, some have been better than others, for sure. But it is time to make that known, and for them to be for there to be accountability around this.
Oh, thank you very much, Jonathan Dekel-Chen, for being here and continuing to fight on behalf of all of the hostages.
Thank you for having me.
A firestorm is surrounding President Trump's decision to detain and deport Palestinian anti-Israel activist Mahmoud Khalil. Khalil, who has a green card and was a student at Columbia University, is said to be a ringleader in the violent anti-Semitic, anti-Israel encampments at Columbia University in the wake of October 7th. We are now joined live by I-24 News senior correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who is in Washington. Hello, Mike. This has definitely been quite a topic that's been talked about, with already a roller coaster just on this one person. Explain more.
Well, it's really created, as if we needed more divides here, a division, even within the Jewish community somewhat, on Mahmoud Khalil, this green card holder, now detained in Louisiana. There was a court hearing yesterday in federal court in the Southern District of New York in Manhattan. A judge there told the U.S. government they could not deport Khalil until this hearing took place. Now the judge wants more information from both sides as to what they feel are the strong points of their case. Meanwhile, Khalil will get to speak with his legal representation. One call yesterday, one call today, as they prepare for a larger hearing now coming up on March the 27th in front of this judge once again. And that doesn't even take into account separate immigration proceedings that may take place here. The government is essentially saying, hey, he doesn't need to be convicted of a crime to be deported under the Immigration and Nationality Act. Any green card holder, not just a visa holder, even a green card holder with legal permanent status, that status can be revoked if that person is found to be aligning with terrorist causes or to have positions that are at odds with U.S. national foreign policy or national security concerns. So the burden of proof is not high. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt like it would be in a criminal case. They just need to present clear and convincing evidence, more like what you would see in a civil type of case, in order to pass any kind of judicial review that may be forthcoming here. So the bar is relatively low and very much left at governmental discretion. The other side, Khalil's side, is saying, hey, he has First Amendment rights. He has rights under the Constitution. He was participating in free speech, disagreeing with the governmental policies. But the government is saying it went way beyond free speech. He was a spokesperson and was active in these not only protests that were going on American college campuses, but the violence that accompanied them, the takeover of buildings, the harassment of Jewish students there, the vandalism of these buildings. It goes beyond just a matter of free speech, which of course has its limitations as well.
We obviously the president has made it clear. We all know that ICE is already a robust group of people, so he's made it clear that more and more people that are believed to be complicit in these could be deported. So is this legal case kind of setting a precedent for what the Trump administration and local authorities could do with others? Because we know there's been a lot of violence against Jews for the past year and a half on campuses.
You know, in some ways it goes beyond a precedent, because this was an interesting test case, if you want to call it that, for the Trump administration to use here, because the burden is higher for a permanent resident holder, somebody on a green card status, than it will be just someone on a student visa. Student visas, you can revoke lickety-split. There's not much you need to do at all. But a green card holder, the burden's actually higher. So the Trump administration actually rolling the dice a little bit on this one, because if they fail, well, then the momentum kind of dies out a little bit for revoking just run-of-the-mill student visa holders. So yes, there is a precedent here. There is the test case being set, but it's on a much different level. The flip side of that is, if the Trump administration is successful on this case and able to clear that higher burden, well, it just makes things easier down the road to deport more of these student visa holders who have taken part in these violent and harassing and intimidating demonstrations.
Also, President Trump announcing he's going to cut $400 million in federal grants just to Columbia. We know Columbia is not the only university. We've seen it all over campuses, not only just in the U.S., but also throughout Europe. So how are American Jewish groups responding to this? And again, could this be a precedent for the same at other universities?
Well, the Trump administration is already actively investigating other universities here, and it would be not a surprise at all if by the end of the week they made a decision to revoke funding on other universities. It's interesting that the Columbia administration, including the administrator of the journalism school there, is telling students, advising students at least, don't take part in these demonstrations if you are on a visa. Don't post any social media content that the Trump administration may use against you. If you already have, delete it. These are active things that the Columbia administration is doing here, because, and the administrator quoted here said outright, we cannot protect you at this point. But the American Jewish community at this point, kind of two different schools of thought. One is keep the pressure on, make sure it's unrelenting in terms of pressing the government to carry out the actions it says it's going to. The other school of thought is, hey, they're doing what they said they would do, at least to this point. Lay off a little bit, give the Trump administration the space it needs to carry out exactly what it said it would do in terms of these deportations, arrests, withdrawing of funding. The task force pursuing anti-Semitism on college campuses announced within the last week or so they're investigating 60 more universities for failing to clamp down on anti-Semitism.
All right, always making things even more complicated. Thank you very much, I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. A new program called Safe U is equipping Jewish university students with tools to defend themselves and to actively navigate anti-Semitism on campuses. Developed by Hillel and the foundation of New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft, the initiative was previewed by three-time Super Bowl champion and Jewish activist and advocate Julian Edelman. Take a listen.
Hey everyone, Julian Edelman here, three-time Super Bowl champion with the New England Patriots. And as a Jewish athlete, I know how important it is to feel proud of who you are and what you stand for. And college should be no different. I also know this past year has been tough for our community, especially on campus. But remember, you're not alone. There are friends and allies all around you, always ready to support you. That's why I'm teaming up with SCN and Hillel International to make sure you have the tools and training to protect yourself and others. Whether it's staying situationally aware or handling any problem that comes your way.
Joining us now from Chicago is Michael Masters, the CEO of SCN, the official safety organization for Jews of North America, here as well to talk more about this new incentive. Thank you, first of all, very much for being here, and quite a task in front of you.
It has been since October 7th. You know, we recognize that Jewish students should be able to focus on the classroom, not be forced to face a phalanx of individuals who are supporting foreign terrorist organizations, as you covered in the last segment. And that's what we're working to do collaboratively between Hillel, FCAS, SCN, and with other partners from law enforcement to our security professional network, over 100 across the country, our federations and other partners.
I'm seeing, on here a lot of, research, and, the statistics are alarming. We knew this was already percolating even before October 7th. So speak about kind of what those tools are. Is it something collaborative also to work with campus authorities, law enforcement? Is it, self-defense, strategy? Explain some of those tools they're learning.
Certainly. So first, let's recognize the reality, right? And since October 7th, over 500 incidents on our campuses that we've tracked, 120 encampments, the targeting of Jewish students, not just the takeover of buildings, but the active harassment and vandalization of facilities and targeted violence towards our Jewish students. So we gathered students from Hillel and across the campus environment and said, what is it that you need? And just as Julian said, they're not alone. We know they're not alone. We're going to be there with them. So SafeU is designed to provide them situational awareness training, how to navigate the campus environment. If the campus administrators aren't going to protect our students, we're going to give them the tools so they can be situationally aware. They know how to respond to an incident or issue. They can make their way through campus, coordinate on their own with campus law enforcement. We brought together 90 law enforcement organizations in a roundtable to include the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. A lot of those law enforcement organizations had been kept in the dark by these campus administrators about what was going on. They want to do their job to serve and protect Jewish students, to serve the community. We brought them together collaboratively, and part of this training is to encourage students reach out, coordinate with law enforcement. We at SCN Hillel, we're here to help you. We're here to make sure that you can get to a Shabbat dinner, so when you're not attacked by somebody wearing a keffiyeh with a bottle like we saw at Pitt, or the A.E. Pie House at San Diego, targeted with fireworks, now being investigated as a hate crime. Or worse, George Mason's student on a visa who was planning an attack on Israeli diplomats. So we've got to equip our students with these skill sets, how to respond to incidents, how to be proactive, how to coordinate. And that's exactly what SafeU is doing on campuses around the country, while we're also working to increase the physical security of our Jewish organizations, securing tens of millions in federal funds to do that at institutions around the country, and sharing intelligence and information.
Oh, wow. All right. Thank you very much. A robust effort. Thank you, Michael Masters, CEO of SCN.
Thank you.
Imagine hundreds of international change makers converging in one place with one purpose: Tikkun Olam. Israeli President Isaac Herzog has spearheaded a global initiative called Voice of the People, which held its first conference in Haifa. And already the momentum is building for a better future. Here's more in my report.
Moved to see everybody here. It's an incredible crowd of people, a dream come true, a great vision. But the real story is you guys, members of the council.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog is on a mission of Tikkun Olam and is raising his voice in a new way.
From generation to generation, we must come with new ideas, brilliant and bold ideas, of how we deal with our Jewish identity, which is ever challenged, especially in this era.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
And the lack of knowledge and understanding of the challenges that each one of your respective communities faces has to be told to one another. Look at the diversity that's in this room. Everybody's here, all facets of Judaism.
The inaugural Voice of the People 5-day summit in Haifa united and inspired a global movement never seen before.
We see this initiative not as a think tank, rather, but something, as we call it in Hebrew, tachlis. We want to actually affect the future. I keep telling the council members, we want to be part of the history of the future. I want you to tell your grandchildren, we were at the first cohort of Voice of the People, because we're building a movement. We're building something that will be told and taught about for years to come.
Being in the land of Israel at such a crucial time and sensitive time has given us the opportunity to feel that there's many ways to give back to Israel. It's like the first time that I feel diaspora Jews and local Jews were working together to make magic happen. What that magic is gonna look like, I still don't know. He knows. I still don't know, but we know we are working hard towards getting a common sense of one people, one Am.
I was physically assaulted with my group during the LGBT Pride March in Washington, D.C., and then the same thing happened again during the Pride March in New York City. Since 2016, I've been raising the red flags about Queers for Palestine. I'm meeting with Knesset members to advocate on behalf of the American Jewish population and speaking about how the Israeli political system very much has failed, in my opinion, the Jewish community internationally.
During the gathering, they also learned about impressive Israeli startups that are changing the world.
So how much it cost? For the drilling, the construction, the pipe, everything I told you, $65,000 at most to bring water to a village of 10,000 people.
But now the pressure is on for the debut council of 50 people from Israel, 50 from North America, and 50 from the rest of the world to literally put on their thinking caps and to get along for the next 2 years.
What's really incredible about being here is the innovation around this program. We have 150 people coming from very contrasting backgrounds, all with the same united ambition. You know, they always say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There's one consistent opinion here. Everyone wants to contribute to the story of the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and that's special.
I started an online social media platform speaking about news and trying to make it much more easy and simplified for the masses. I never ever thought I'd do work in the form of journalism, and never crossed my mind. And so I think there's more and more of us, and I hope that they'll just continue to grow.
I can't say that you are handpicked because you were picked by an algorithm. But it's truly, each and every one of you is expected to influence the Jewish story wherever you are for the rest of your lives. Look how many terrible atrocities have befallen our people, and we strive on and on and on. And we do good, and we strive for the great values of Tikkun Olam.
Oscar-nominated Hollywood triple threat Jesse Eisenberg is now getting an honor of a lifetime after garnering critical acclaim for the film A Real Pain, which he wrote, directed, and starred in. He has now been given citizenship to the very country where many of his ancestors perished in the Holocaust. Here's more from I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown.
You might know him as Mark Zuckerberg or Lex Luthor, but now Hollywood superstar Jesse Eisenberg is rediscovering his roots.
First of all, dziękuję bardzo. I am so honored. I am happy to be a European member, but I am even happier to be a citizen of Poland.
After writing, directing, and starring in the award-winning A Real Pain, a film about 2 mismatched cousins going on a Holocaust-themed tour around Poland to honour their late grandmother, Eisenberg felt himself becoming closer to the land his ancestors grew up on.
I was walking the streets and starting to get a little more comfortable in the country. It occurred to me that something so obvious occurred to me, which is that my family had lived in this place for far longer than we've lived in New York. And of course, the history ended so tragically, but in addition to that tragedy of history is also the tragedy that my family didn't feel any connection anymore to Poland. And that saddened me and made me and confirmed for me that I really wanted to try to reconnect as much as possible.
Eisenberg grew up in a secular Jewish household in New York, the descendant of Polish and Ukrainian ancestors, including his great-aunt Doris. The movie was inspired by his own trip to Poland in 2008, where he visited the home his late great-aunt grew up in.
It occurred to me while I was there that there are so many Polish people who are doing far more to memorialize my family history than I've ever done. And it made me feel that much more connected to the country and made me feel that much more emotionally invested to connecting with Polish people.
Poland was invaded by Nazi Germany in September 1939, and over the following half a decade of occupation, 3 million Polish Jews were murdered, with thousands, such as Eisenberg's family, fleeing to unoccupied Europe, the US, or mandatory Palestine. Poland has been accused of Holocaust distortion in recent times, with the 2018 law banning anyone for blaming Poland for their complicity in the Holocaust. They claim that they too are victims of Nazi occupation.
I have to say that, as President of Poland, I'm very happy to see people from around the world, also from across the ocean, remember about their heritage, about their ancestors who came from Poland, and they want to establish ties with our country.
Receiving Polish citizenship rounds up a successful few months for Eisenberg. He was nominated for Best Original